All right, so AIM 7.6, how do the Maurya and Gupta empires represent golden ages? So we refer to both of these empires, Maurya and Gupta, as the golden age of India. So we will go through kind of their origins and what some of the highlights are of each of these empires, and we kind of combine them and say, from the Maurya to the Gupta represents the golden age of India, even though there's, a couple hundred years between them. All right, I'll give you a second. Okay, not a ton here. 321 BCE, so before Common Era, to 185 BCE, before Common Era. So what do we got? 140-ish years of the Mauryan Empire. It's founded by this guy named Chandragupta Maurya. And basically, he's going to unite a bunch of kind of independent tribes across northern India to form this first kind of legit Indian empire. There had been other empires in control of this territory before, but this is the first time that it's going to be kind of united by a entity that exists within this area. It's not from an outside source. So this is not like the Persian Empire uniting all of these places. This is coming from within. So the Mauryan Empire is the first real united Indian empire that is governed by people that are actually from this place. All right, I'll give you a second. We definitely need to know about this guy. All right, when we play word association, when we think Mauryan Empire, we should be thinking Ashoka, who is this guy. You will see his name pronounced Ashoka, but you'll see it spelled with and without the H. So here it's Asoka, but you might see it as Ashoka. Either way, it's Ashoka. He is the founder, Chandragupta Maurya's grandson, and by far the greatest Mauryan ruler. His story is an interesting one, and we'll hear more about it later. But he starts off as kind of like brutal kind of warlord style. And then eventually later in his life, he has kind of an epiphany and he adopts Buddhism and he flips kind of 180 degrees where he becomes this super benevolent, thoughtful, empathetic figure that, rules his people with love. He brings peace and prosperity. And his most famous thing is religious tolerance. This is India. So, and we've also had the Islamic Empire stretching into this area also. So from his perspective, though, Hindu, Islam, this is before Islam, but, it didn't matter what you believe, but he was kind of tolerant of all religions and refused to treat people based on class systems or religious beliefs or ethnicities. So he was super far ahead of his time, especially after his adoption of Buddhism, super far ahead of his time, as far as equality and, racial, ethnic equality, things like that. So way, way far ahead of his time. All right, Gupta. All right. So after the collapse of the Mauryan Empire, you have a few hundred years here of what's called a warring states period. This phenomenon is not specific to India. China is probably most well known for this, but there are spaces between kind of dominant dynasties and dominant empires where there's a lot of infighting amongst people for power and supremacy. And these are typically called like warring states period, where different territories are kind of battling each other for dominance. After a couple hundred years of that, you get Samudragupta, who's the greatest Gupta ruler, and he's going to kind of reunite most of India. So you can see in the map here, everything northern India kind of is united under this Gupta Empire. And if you take a look at the time, I think we said the Mauryan Empire ended like 180 something BCE, and then we got to go to 320 CE. So we're 500 or so years of kind of this warring states period. So that's the gap between Maurya and Gupta. All right, we definitely need this. So, if golden ages are really about achievements and accomplishments, when we talk about Maurya, the first one, we need to be talking about Ashoka and religious tolerance and things like that. And when it comes to Gupta, this is more of the kind of the cultural achievement portion of the story here. So, their big things are arts, science, and math. Okay. Um, I don't know why, but New York State loves asking questions about the Gupta Empire and the invention of the number zero, if you want to even call it a number. But one of the big things they stress time and time again on a lot of these state tests is we need to know that the Gupta Empire in India came up with the idea of zero, which I get why it's important. I mean, I suppose it's underrated. Zero makes a lot of arithmetic possible, and without it, we kind of have a hard time doing a lot of math. So it certainly is important, but it's weird that they kind of latch onto that. The other interesting thing about the Gupta is they developed this number system here. Um, and you could see the striking similarities between their number system on the bottom and our 0 through 9 system on the top. You can see the similarities there pretty clear. So we borrow a lot from that. They also figured out a lot of things about astronomy and just kind of earth science, for lack of a better term. The idea that the earth rotates on an axis, the idea, they understood gravity and eclipses and what was happening there, and a lot of classical art and architecture too. So India, brain stuff. Okay, so that this is not like they're making things necessarily, like inventions, like objects, manufactured goods. This is more ideas. This is kind of brain stuff and education stuff. So that's what we need to kind of associate. If New York State asks you about Gupta Empire, it's probably in relation to math. So the idea of zero, the numbering system, etc. So when we play word association here, we think Gupta, Gupta India. We need to be thinking achievements in math. That's generally the safe bet. They don't really tend to ask much else other than that.